Okay, thanks.
All right, let's go ahead and move on, see if anybody has any questions about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. While we wait to see if anybody else has one, I, of course, have a question for you. There's been a lot of talk about the oversight of the Bureau and how much transparency it's going to have. Does the Congressman believe that Congress needs to have direct oversight, including appropriation of the Bureau, and what's going to be proposed to look at that?
Yes, Congressman Garrett does believe the CFPB should be subject to the appropriations process. Elizabeth Warren has been quoted recently in the newspaper by saying that because they are a quote-unquote banking regulator, subjecting them to the appropriations process would be a new standard to any banking regulator, and would be changing the past 80 years of precedence in terms of funding for banking regulators. Yes, while it is true that the FDIC, the Federal Reserve, and the OCC have independent funding, it is for a much different reason than Elizabeth Warren and the CFPB are arguing that they need independent funding. The Federal Reserve has independent funding. One, and it's independent because of, one, its monetary policy function, and two, because of its banking regulatory function that it's gained over time. The FDIC and the OCC both are safety and soundness regulators, not consumer protection. Other consumer protection agencies, like the Federal Trade, like the FTC or the Consumer Product Safety Commission, both of those come under the appropriations process because they have consumer protection functions, just like the CFPB. So yes, while the CFPB is a bank, does have bank examination powers, it has those powers to conduct consumer protection, not safety and soundness. So the OCC and the FDIC and the Fed have this independence from the appropriations process so that Congress does not affect the safety and soundness of financial institutions. But that's a totally different reason than why the CFPB is saying it needs to have it. So Elizabeth Warren is very misleading in her comments she's been making recently, and so I think this area needs to be clarified. Two, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, and the FDIC all have other checks as well. They're either boards. There's a Federal Reserve board. There's an FDIC board. The OCC is underneath the Treasury. The CFPB has none of that. It's not a board. It's one person calling the shots with absolutely no check and no check over it whatsoever. And so there are a number of things that need to be done to this agency to make sure it does have the appropriate accountability, transparency for the American taxpayer. It needs to be brought onto budget and be subject to the appropriations process, annual appropriations process of Congress. And two, it should have a board instead of one director calling the shots like the other regulators. So I would argue those two things for all the specific reasons I laid out.
Chris Markheimer again. I heard a rumor last week, I think it was, that the CFPB in the startup phase over at Treasury right now is currently drafting rules with the anticipation that on the July 21st transfer date, when the Bureau is in full effect, that they will have proposed rules ready to release and go into the Federal Register literally within days. Have you heard anything to that effect, and what the timeline is for their rulemaking? As I understand it, they have approximately 3,300 different rules that they'll have to look over in the first couple of years.
Yeah, I've heard similar things. I don't know a lot of the specifics on exactly what rules they have. I know that one on the home mortgage, the combination of the rules in terms of the RESPA rule and on what the homeowners sign in terms of disclosures. I know they're working on consolidating that rule at the very first here. And who knows, I know I've also seen some new credit card rules that they're maybe looking at. You know, I don't think they should be doing anything until they have a director actually confirmed, and I think they've skated the whole intent of the law. So the only one check that Congress did put in over this agency was to have their director confirmed by the Senate. So what's the first thing the Obama administration did? they circumvented that one check and put Elizabeth Warren in some quasi-position as a White House advisor / Treasury advisor to circumvent the check that Congress had put in place through the statute and to allow Elizabeth Warren, who I think we most agree that could not get confirmed in the Senate, to allow her to continue doing all this work as a quote-unquote director without being subject to that Senate confirmation. So it just goes to show you why Congress needs to have more checks, because obviously the administration is going to do whatever they can to go around the checks that we do have in place.
Okay, we don't have any audience questions at this point. Our next subject here is other government institutions. And I think Karen had talked about the FDIC briefly.
Yeah.
I wanted to go ahead and maybe ask a question on that with the FDIC. The FDIC is a major player in the economy, and the American people are subject to essentially bailing out that which bails out the banking system. Yet the FDIC is not fully transparent, even to the point where transactions that are engaged in are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act or public disclosure. I guess my question is, what can we do about this?
Well, that's a very good question. I have heard a little bit of that. I haven't heard a whole lot of specific concerns raised like that. But I think Congress needs to apply appropriate oversight over the FDIC. If they don't have to comply with FOIA requests, what other mechanisms or ways that we have to try to make them more accountable and more transparent, because they are essentially a government function that is being paid, at least indirectly, by the taxpayers. Congress, I'm sure we're going to have a number of hearings with the FDIC. Have Ms. Barrett, I know Ms. Barrett was testifying, Chairman Barrett was testifying last week at the Senate Banking Committee. So yeah, I would love to, keep discussing with anyone who has concerns on this and really learn the specifics of their concerns and figure out ways that we can try to help them be more, help them be more accountable.
Okay, great. We don't have any more audience questions on that particular topic. Chris, Representative Garrett serves on the House Financial Literacy Caucus, which seeks to expand personal knowledge of money, savings, investing, and things, economic matters on a personal level. Given everything that's changed in the past, how do we change financial literacy in this country to make sure that these problems that we've had, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, don't occur again on a personal level?
Well, that's look, a lot of the problems we got into is because there wasn't enough financial literacy in terms of people understanding how a lot of the different dynamics and things about the system work. Didn't understand the problems of taking on too much debt, of becoming, at least personally, over-leveraged. And a lot of people have had to learn had to learn a lot of this the hard way, unfortunately. Congressman Garrett always kind of makes a little flippant joke, even though I think there's probably some hint of truth to it, that the first people that need to have financial literacy are members of Congress, because a lot of these reforms that we're making, they're not always sure, the best ways to go, and so that's always a funny one that he puts out there. But in terms of helping conduct financial literacy, I mean, I think it's important. I think there's a lot more going on at schools today, at high schools. It's important to start earlier, get them in, open up a checking account early for children, have them learn at the high school level before they get to college, and then at college. And so I know Congressman Garrett's going to keep working on that and trying to make sure that we put together seminars and do different things to help keep encouraging this, because it is such an important part of the system going forward.
All right, Karen, if you'd like to conclude us, we're right on time here. All right, I think we may be having some problem with Karen's audio. Chris, on behalf of Karen Turner and Turner.
Oh, there I am. Sorry about that. Oh, sorry about that. I was trying to be very conscientious on keeping myself on mute. But I want to thank our audience, first of all, for joining us. And number two, This concludes our webinar. I'd like to thank Chris and Mark for doing a wonderful job on our webinar. As we do future webinars on topics of public policy, we'd like to notify you, and if you have any suggestions, please don't hesitate for speakers or topics you'd like to hear more about, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're at turnergpa.com, and again, on behalf of Turner Government and Public Affairs, thank you for joining us, and special thanks to Chris and Mark for giving a wonderful presentation. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having us, Karen. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mark, for everything.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you.